Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hi, everybody. It's Tom Woods. It's episode, believe it or not, 2645 of The Tom Woods Show. When civilization has been restored, we'll just stop doing this. But until that time, I'm going to keep pumping these things out. And I'm really happy to have a guest we haven't had on in quite some time, and that is our old friend Paul Gottfried. You're still editor of Chronicles magazine?
I am still editor of Chronicles magazine with continued promotion.
All right. Chronicles magazine. Now, this you can decide if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Published my very first published article over 30 years ago. So I'm a fan of Chronicles magazine, as I am of Paul Gottfried, who is the author of a great many books, some of which I have reviewed. And the key thing is, in addition to having a PhD from Yale, Paul has a collection of his work from over the years on some of the key themes that he's covered, coming out, if not imminently, then in the relatively near future. And we're going to do an episode on that because I want to emphasize the importance, especially for younger people who are just getting into these sorts of things, to read what Paul's been writing throughout his career. And that way, not only will they be better informed, they'll avoid a lot of embarrassing errors, and they'll be able to have a clearer sense of, who the good and bad guys are in the grand scheme of things. So, Paul, welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me once again. I think this must be about the 10th time I've been on your program, and each time I've been delighted by the experience.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to hear that. All right, well, let's start with the most obvious thing. I mean, we've just, not too terribly long ago, passed 100 days of Donald Trump, and I'd like to know what's Paul Gottfried's assessment?
Well, I like some of the things that he's done, and particularly after reading an article by Rich Lowry, which was one of the front pages of the today's New York Post, explaining that Trump missed an opportunity to convert the Middle East to democracy, and he has refused to stand up for our most important value. Unlike George W. Bush, who was presumably a successful president because he went around the world spreading democracy. And as I was reading this, I came to respect Donald Trump for what he did not do. He spoke about peace and prosperity, not about spreading this post-Christian religion of democracy. So, I liked his first 100 or 120. I don't know where we are. I liked the first 120 days better than the Bushite alternative. And I was particularly impressed, being a European historian, by J.D. Vance's comments in Germany. I thought the degenerate, denatured form of democracy, which is really totalitarianism that the Germans are now running, deserved to be criticized. And I was glad that Vance did that. He showed, what a mockery of constitutional freedom now exists, not only in Germany, but in most of the other European countries. To his credit, I think Trump is trying to reform some of these or deal with some of these problems at home. And I like the fact that he's going after DEI, that he's trying to disencumber us of of much of this bureaucracy that should not be there in the first place, starting with the Department of Education. Let me note that as an advisor to the Reagan administration, I suggested that they abolish the Department of Education, and my services were not needed afterwards. As the Department of Education grew under Reagan, and as he found positions for neoconservatives without removing the positions which the regular left was then holding. So I'm generally pleased with what Trump is doing there. I am not very pleased with the tariffs, particularly since he's trying to, inflict them in all these countries at the same time. And I think if he's unhappy with trade imbalance and so forth, he can address this problem with individual countries rather than offering us his day of liberation, which I think was probably an unbalanced mistake.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see exactly how that unfolds. I mean, we're getting piecemeal one announcement after another about some existing or imminent agreement with this country or that. But what has not pleased me is that some of his supporters treat you like you're some kind of a materialistic idiot when you point out that the sum total of all this is not just chaos, which is bad for everybody, but it's also a direct hit at the standard of living of the very people we're supposed to be helping through this. And the response you get is that all you care about is money and getting cheap goods from China. And now that's the kind of way the left talked to me during COVID, that all I cared about was the GDP and not about people's lives. I mean, I expect better than this from the right. And again, what exactly is prosperity, if not the ability to acquire the physical things you need for your existence? So I mean, part of that is going to be low prices. I mean, I know that makes me sound like homo economicus or whatever, but it's like, does the whole conversation have to be this low IQ?
No, I agree with you. I mean, the worst thing is if you criticize Trump, you're betraying the MAGA cause.
Yeah.
And there is a certain kind of fanaticism that I think attaches to this. Some of the people working in the administration, will hold it against anyone that person criticizes Trump. That everything he does is fine, and we have to be happy with the tariffs, even if their effect, as you said, is to cause chaos. And I think this is a problem that we face. I mean, there's this kind of populist enthusiasm for Trump that does not allow us to be critical, even of somebody we voted for, and with whom I am generally pleased, although not on these tariffs. Something else that does bother me, and here perhaps I'm showing that I'm a snob, but I'll express this criticism nonetheless, that Trump speaks badly. He speaks in slogans. He mutilates the English language. His syntax is awful. And I'm sometimes embarrassed just listening to him speak. Now, I know that, this shows a certain academic fastidiousness, and it's probably not to be tolerated in a man. But I genuinely dislike his rhetoric.
Yeah, I've thought about this too, in the sense that it has the effect of serving to discredit some good ideas, otherwise good ideas, that people will listen to them. Mostly people whose opinions I don't care that much about, frankly, but people will hear them and think, well, the ideas themselves must be foolish if they're expressed in this way. But, I share some of these ideas and I can express them in Elizabethan English, if you like, if that would be to your preference. So I get that. And so it annoys me for that reason only, really. Although I'll tell you something, I am a bit of a stickler in general when it comes to English usage. And like, for example, sometimes even when an incorrect usage, just by virtue of the passage of time, becomes considered an acceptable usage, I still don't accept it. So for example, the expression, oh gosh, what is it? Begs the question.
Mm-hmm.
Is misused 95% of the time. They'll say, well, Trump is imposing tariffs, but this begs the question of how the world is going to. That's not what begs the question means.
No.
But the dictionaries now allow that definition, but I don't. I still insist that's wrong.
You get
the question
point?
Means you're proceeding in your discussion while having assumed the very thing that is to be proven. That's begging the question.
Right. Yeah, I'm also annoyed when people begin sentences with however or nonetheless. I would prefer not begin the sentence with a conjunction. I think that is allowed, and people always tell me that I'm objecting to something that was settled 150 years ago. And that
I know. But the things, I will tell you one thing, and folks, this is a small interlude. We will get back to our Trump conversation in just a minute here. But I personally think, though, that sometimes, for the sake of preserving the English language and for the sake of elegance, occasionally some rules need to be broken. For example, ending a sentence with a preposition. Sometimes it's uglier to avoid that than it is just to do it. Mm-hmm. So that's an issue. And another one that I'm a stickler on, but not publicly, just in my heart, I'm secretly judging you if you get this wrong, is the use of the word hopefully. Now, I know that you can probably find archaic uses of hopefully that involve the meaning of, for example, a sentence like this, hopefully we will get better weather next week. But the original meaning of hopefully, overwhelmingly, was simply, he looked hopefully at the skies as he contemplated mankind's destiny to explore the universe. That's what hopefully is supposed to mean. So anyway, Paul, we shouldn't do this. You and I should not do this.
I find the use of the misuse of hopefully so unnerving that even when I write German, and the word hoffentlich, which is hopefully, can be used in the sense in which we would not want it to be used in English. But I would never use.
You still won't use it in German?
Absolutely not.
All right, now that is hardcore, Paul Gottfried.
I hate
All right.
that.
We bring our pet peeves even into other languages. All right, fantastic. All right, so getting back to Trump, are you getting this sense that there is perhaps developing, I don't want to get my hopes up, because when I get my hopes up with Trump, on the basis of one speech or one thing he did, I get my heart broken. But is there a rift developing between him and or his people and the neocons?
Yeah, no, I think it's clear. He does attack the neocons regularly in his speeches. And he did this in a speech that he gave in Riyadh. He said that, he is breaking from the neocons and other people on the left. So, it's clear he does not consider them part of his movement, and he considers them as enemies, which I think is a change from his first administration, right? In which he put neoconservatives in high positions. Now, somebody I would have thought would be inclined toward neoconservatism would be Rubio, but Rubio has worked very faithfully under Trump. He served Trump's foreign policy very, very faithfully. And it's not at all the way, the relationship with John Bolton, for instance, in Trump's first term. So I think he knows who neoconservatives are, and he has tried to keep a distance from them. The problem is that he's very much dependent on Republican media, which means Fox News. And Fox News is subsidized by neoconservatives. You have neoconservatives on Fox News all the time. Unfortunately, the Murdoch media empire, is what mediates republicanism or transmits Republican views in the United States. And the people who run that are neoconservatives. So I think that there is a neoconservative filter that remains when Trump tries to present his views. And I think he's influenced to some extent by that. But I think what clearly distinguishes the second term is that he seems much more aware of who the neoconservatives are and has made an effort to keep them out of his government and regularly attacks them in his speeches.
Folks, I know homeschooling families that are running themselves ragged, trying to keep up with everything. They're overwhelmed by unfinished housework and kids at different grade levels, holding everything together. Well, that's where the self-taught Ron Paul curriculum comes in. It gives homeschooling parents their mental health back by taking so much of the burden off their shoulders. Not to mention, with the Ron Paul curriculum, your worldview has a fighting chance of being passed on to your children. Your students will learn all the standard subjects. You should see how much the middle schoolers love the science courses. They often want to go ahead to the next grade because they're enjoying them so much. Your high schoolers will learn government and Western Civ from me. And in addition to the usual subjects, they'll also learn things no government school will teach them, like how to manage their money, how to be an effective public speaker, how to run a home business. Plus, join through my link and you'll get $160 in free bonuses from me. My link is ronpaulhomeschool.com. That's ronpaulhomeschool.com. On the other hand, the sense I get is that people want to be in Trump's good graces. So if he's shifting in a direction against the neocons, then people who are only neocon friendly because they think that's what it takes to get ahead in Washington will jump off that bandwagon right away because they want some cushy position in the White House, or they want to be friendly with Trump. They want to be friendly with his presumed successor. So it is an interesting moment for the neocons. Mark Levin is very unhappy all of a sudden, and I consider that a good thing.
Yes, I do too. No, I think you're absolutely right. They're not always going to be happy. Levin has been a very strong backer of Trump.
Yeah.
And some of the arguments he's made against the judiciary, I think, are extremely appropriate, very insightful. But obviously, I think a parting of the ways has come over Trump's positions on the Middle East, particularly Israel, which you knew would be the case. The people who trouble me are those like this Hewlett, who is a conservative, a Republican who'll go with the wind wherever it takes him. And right now he's praising Trump, but he's clearly influenced by the neoconservatives. So he tries somehow to place Trump's ideas within an acceptable neoconservative framework. And you do have some of these people, particularly news commentators, and some of the people that I hear on Fox. But I think there's also, at least what I'm finding, particularly since Trump moved away from the very, very strongly pro-Likud position that he was taking a few months ago, that criticism is coming from neoconservative. And it's not only over Israel, but I mean, you read people like Douglas Murray, certainly Rich Lowry, the National Yipites. They clearly are now going after Trump. I thought it was remarkable that Douglas Murray had a piece in today's New York Post in which he beat up Trump because he accepted the plane from Qatar. I said this is a terrible move by Trump, and he's betrayed democracy, Israel, everybody else, and so forth. Well, actually, the plane I think was ordered by Biden, was accepted by Biden, and Trump is just going along with this.
Yeah,
but obviously the neoconservatives will come after him if they become extremely irritated by something that he's done. And I think they understand that at the end of the day, they're not his preferred people.
Yeah. That Douglas Murray thing is interesting because I'm sure it fell on your radar at some point. The Joe Rogan episode recently with Dave Smith and Douglas Murray, and people were acting surprised as if, isn't it funny that Douglas Murray came on Joe Rogan's show and within minutes was in effect insulting his host over his choice of guests. But I thought, this doesn't surprise me at all because I remember months ago, also in the New York Post, Douglas Murray had an article, in effect lecturing Trump about Ukraine. The dictator is Putin here, and the victim is, and it was like at a third grade level. And I thought, what a jerk. I mean, who would think I really need to listen to this guy to get my guidance on, any topic whatsoever?
He is very popular on Fox. I see him all the time.
Yeah.
He's involved with this University of Austin with Barry Weiss and Jordan Peterson. He is also very much of a neoconservative. He founded a neoconservative organization in England, the Henry Jackson Society. So you can't be more neoconservative than Douglas Murray. What I find interesting is he's an English person. I think he's Presbyterian. I could be wrong. He could be an Anglican. He's certainly not Jewish, but he gives out merits and demerits to people on the basis of whether they're pro-Jewish or anti-Semitic. He's sort of a judge of this matter. I think it was Buckley, remember years ago in Search of Anti-Semitism.
The long essay, yeah.
Decided he was a maven, like an expert on it. He'll tell you who's an anti-Semite. This one's, minimally anti-Semitic. This one's more anti-Semitic. And it's what I call vicarious victimology. It's like people who really have nothing to do with the group they're talking about, who become judges. And look about merits and Buckley, I don't know, well, gave him a special right, I suppose because his father was anti-Semitic or something, like gave him a special right to do this, but he gave Buchanan a demerit. I think he gave Sam Francis half a demerit. So forth. And Douglas Murray's in the same tradition, it goes around and you're anti-Semitic, you're this, you're that. I reviewed his latest book for our magazine, the Chronicles, and I was actually shocked by how little he knew about Middle Eastern history. I mean, he makes one mistake after the other. he had the grand mufti dying in Israel. He didn't die in Israel, he died in Egypt. And, said he was some kind of dangerous Nazi, of which he was not. He was a crank, a dangerous Nazi. But there were all kinds of mistakes there about, there were Palestinians living in what's now Israel for a very, very long time. And there was and some were driven out, if you bring this up, apparently you get an anti-Semitic demerit or something like that. But I made like one mistake after the other. And yet this book got very highly, it was praised on several programs on Fox News. Greg Gutfeld, Brett Baer, others urged us to read this book, to go out and Biden's new book at once. It's terrible. And presumably we're supposed to believe he's an expert because he actually went to the Middle East.
Yeah.
This makes him an expert.
A lot of people, Paul, a lot of American journalists at the end of the 19-teens went and visited Soviet Russia, as a matter of fact.
Right. Yeah. And came back and they saw their dream being realized. I sort of wonder whether Murray has, just found a good thing professionally and commercially and decided to embrace it, or whether he really believes the junk that he writes. I mean, I'm not quite, maybe it's a combination of both.
There are a couple things I want to say. First, Dave makes the excellent point that when Douglas Murray comes along and says we need to, feature on podcasts like this, not just amateurs on the internet, but people with real expertise, he never criticizes any pro-war voice for being ignorant. It's all the ignorant people are always the people who, by coincidence, happen to have different opinions from his. How about that?
One of the things I thought was interesting in the book, as he says, Israelis are ready to fight for democracy, just as my ancestors were happy in World War I to go off and to die fighting for democracy. And actually, they should not have gone off at all. There was a European civil war. They should have stayed out of it. But, this way, anyhow, there are fewer Douglas Murrays they produced since they died in the war. But there was, it's like he's giving, these are the good people. They went off and fought in a useless war, and it did not affect you because they were fighting, or so they thought, or so Murray wants us to believe, for democracy.
Now, another thing that's come up that is very much in the Paul Gottfried wheelhouse in the past year or so on the right has been a reexamination of certain episodes in 20th century history, particularly World War II. But also, that tends to lead also to a reexamination of World War I. And certainly with World War I, there was a very, very simplistic answer to that given to us in the Treaty of Versailles. Germany did this. When anybody looking at it can see there's blame enough to go around for the outbreak of World War I. But the impression that we get from a Douglas Murray, and I don't mean really to keep focusing on him, but he brought it up. The impression that we get is that we ought not, that there's somehow something suspicious or wrong about, let's say, a quote unquote revisionist look at Winston Churchill. And I wonder, and I know that what your opinions on World War II are, but I don't know what your opinions on Churchill are. And what do you think? Because Pat Buchanan in his book wrote a chapter on Churchill that is that's pretty compelling, I think, making taking the contrary position. Where do you come down on that?
I probably come down somewhere in the middle. I am a World War I revisionist. In fact,
who isn't, Paul, at this point, right? Why wouldn't you be?
Neoconservatives are not.
That's true. Great point.
Right. You turn on Fox News and, you get Woodrow Wilson's view of World War I. So I am a strong revisionist of World War I. I think World War II, in World War II, there was a need to stop the Nazis from overrunning Europe. But this does not justify things like saturation bombing, terror bombing, refusal to deal with opposition forces in Germany. And there were. And that Churchill would have nothing to do with them because he wanted the war to go on. until Germany would be totally destroyed. They were England's enemies, and I also think he bears great responsibility for World War One. He viewed war with Germany as inevitable. He pushed England in the direction of making alliances with the French and the Russians against Germany and Austria. He was one of the war hawks from the time the Grey government, the government of Edward Grey, came into power. This is something that the Churchill admirers tried to gloss over or justify. He was also a big fan of the Boer War, which was a totally unnecessary war. So he generally liked wars, from what I can tell. And I am happy that he would not give in to Hitler, but the things that he ended up doing in fighting the Nazis brought destruction to much of Central Europe, and also had some bearing on Soviet policy. And the fact that the Soviets wound up occupying so much of Europe and imposing on them a government that was only minimally better than the Nazi government that was driven away. So I would say I don't hate Churchill. I do not share as negative a view as Ralph Raico, although I enjoyed Ralph's lectures he used to give on Churchill. And he's certainly not one of my heroes. If I'm looking for great men in history I can really admire, he's not one of them. I don't think he ranks, even as high as Bismarck, who was a man with really some sense of restraint once he unified his country. He certainly is not a person of the caliber of George Washington. As I said, I sort of fall somewhere in the middle. I think the attempt to deal with Hitler went in some ways in the wrong direction, but I think it was a necessity to stop Nazi Germany from spreading. I think they did pose a danger. On the other hand, I fully recognize the danger the Soviets posed, at the same time. So I think there would have been some need for a kind of balancing act in dealing with both of these enemies. They were both enemies. And I don't think Churchill provided. On the other hand, one might say in his defense, he was holding a weak hand because his country had become a second-rate power. A second-rate power largely because, he helped agitate or incite World War I, and then had pulled the United States in, and the United States became the major power, and England became a secondary power.
Hey, everybody, this isn't a sponsor message. It's an announcement that I have 11 awesome free things to give you that you're going to love, and not one of them is an ebook. For instance, my public speaking secrets that come from my 30-year career, or Dr. Miriam Grossman on how to inoculate your kids against gender ideology, my 10-lesson middle school course on the foundations of liberty. It isn't available for sale anywhere, but if you want it, it's on the freebies page that I'm telling you about now. Here's one you'll like. A simple way to generate $50 per month in perpetuity without work. Now, I'm wording it that way specifically to annoy people who refuse to believe anything. Woods, there's no such thing, they'll say. Oh, but there absolutely is. I earn 3 times that much with it, and I am not joking. Or how about this? Chances are you're right like a dork. I hate to break it to you, but since 90% of the public does, that likely includes you. I'll help you stop, which means you'll stand out in whatever you do. Or how about a case study in which one of my friends, who built a 7-figure recipe website, shares how she did it? There are more, 11 in total. To get them, all you have to do is say maybe to my awesome School of Life program that everyone raves about. Give it a spin for 30 days for $1, and you can have the 11 freebies in perpetuity. Get them now at 11freebies.com. Do you think, now I asked this in part because I just came back from yet another trip to London. Do you think the world and or the British people are better off without the British Empire?
They'd be better off without the British Empire if they didn't have a crazy immigration policy. If they didn't, one of the things that I credit Churchill for doing was when he came back in his last term, as prime minister, he warned against letting all these people from the Commonwealth, into England. And he was absolutely right. De Gaulle made it, issued a similar warning in France. But once they decided they were not going to be an empire, they should not have encouraged dual world immigration. The same thing, I suppose, was true in the case of de Gaulle. He pulled out of Algeria. He did not want Algerian Muslims to come to France. He was totally opposed to that. It's going to wipe our hands of this. And I think once the British decided against the empire, they should have become England again. The empire, I think, in some ways was inevitable, sort of given the geographical and geopolitical and economic position of England. But once they decided they weren't going to be an empire, they should have become they should have become English again.
I hate to keep bringing things back to Douglas Murray. I really, honest to goodness, I do. I've never talked about him, written about him, had him on, spoken to him, met him. I have no connection to him whatsoever. But as I recall, either in that discussion on Joe Rogan or in some other context, he pointed at somebody accusingly and said that this person had said that the Germans after World War II, and even leading up to this very day, had been put through a kind of re-education program to fill them with guilt about, not just about the Nazi period, but I think the implication was that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. Mm-hmm. And he didn't say why it was wrong for somebody to have said that. He just couldn't believe somebody would say a thing like that. And I know that this is the kind of thing that, in fact, not only is true, but drives Paul Gottfried crazy about post-war German culture.
Well, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, the Germans hate themselves even more than Douglas Murray hates them. If the Germans right now are going after the AfD because among other reasons, one of the delegates or members of the Bundestag, who was an AfD member, said that the Germans are people. Now, that's in their constitution, by the way, but he dared to say it. And then the people coming in from Eastern Europe are Volksdeutsche, they're ethnic Germans. You're not allowed to say this, but someone in the AfD said that the Germans are a nation, so they're going to ban the party. They're not even supposed to be a nation, as they explained. They're just individuals who happen to have entered that area of land over the last 2,000 years. So they go beyond Douglas Murray, but one thing that's characteristic of all neocons is this pathological hatred for everything German. Now, if you say you don't like Nazis, fine, I can understand that. And it's like, Bismarck or Frederick the Great, or everybody gets thrown into the same category. They're all Nazis or precursors of the Nazis or post-Nazi Nazis or something like that. There is an obsession, and I think what it is the memory of Hitler in the Second World War that has led into this demonology pretending to be history. And I think someone like Douglas Murray probably has put this up as to benefit his career, as a neoconservative. If you hate the Germans enough, this is the most extreme example that I found was somebody, Fred Siegel, who's recently deceased, who said, who hated Aschel Mencken because he was pro-German in World War I. And he said that he was pro-German at a time when the Germans planned to invade the United States. And the only evidence that he had was the Germans had a war plan, a contingency war plan in case the United went to war against the United States. But every European country had a contingency plan against every other country going back to the 1890s or 1880s or something like that. And Siegel sort of picked this up, to show this. I thought he would probably tell us that there's a danger that Germans are now going to invade us or something like that. But it is an obsession. The most interesting example of this obsession I find in what's his name, the one who has the Ben Shapiro was explaining once that it would be a good thing if the Israelis expelled every Palestinian from the West Bank. And he said that policy works because they expelled all these Germans after World War II, and that worked. That was a good policy too. And I wrote a column in which I raised the question: what happened if you would say that blacks in America have a high crime rate, and that we should expel all of them? I mean, would you see any? Of course, you say anything like that, you ruined, right? But it's okay to expel Germans and Palestinians and people his sponsors don't like.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Things like this, Paul, make you wonder if maybe there's a double standard in the world,
Yeah, yes, there is. More than one double standard.
More than one.
One for neocons and one for the rest of us.
You mentioned Fox News. I never have the TV on. I mean, I don't mean I don't watch it. I mean, I don't just randomly have it on. So Fox News just does not get channeled into my home ever. I see an occasional clip, that's shared with me on social media or something, but that's it. So that means my impression of where, let's say, the right is not coming from that. It's coming from social media and podcasts. Mm-hmm. And it looks to me as if over the past 10 years, there's been a pretty, even if Fox News has stayed more or less the same, there's been a pretty dramatic shift among a lot of opinion molders on the right against neoconservatism and in more the direction of a Buchananite conservatism, which isn't without its aspects that I would criticize, but they're not. I'd still rather have Pat Buchanan as my next door neighbor than these other people. So, but do you notice that also, even though maybe your exposure is more to Fox News than anything else?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think they've sort of taken over this entire Buchananite position as a block, but I do think they definitely moved in that. I thought you would say you would rather have Pat Buchanan as president than George W. Bush or something.
Well, I assume that went without saying.
Yes.
But I mean, like when I think about the differences that I have with a Pat Buchanan, these are differences that make for interesting dinner conversation.
Right.
They're not differences that involve one of us wanting the other one and his family exterminated. They're not fundamental differences of that nature. We can banter about them. We can even argue with passion about them. But at the end of the day, we clink glasses at the end. I wish all my differences were like that.
Yeah, I think in the case of Douglas Murray, what makes him particularly offensive is that one suspects he's an opportunist. Now, I can understand somebody who lost their family, a Russian Jew who lost his family in the Holocaust, hating Germans. I mean, it's perfectly understandable. I mean, it might lead to the horrible history and misjudgment, but I could understand that. The only way I can explain Douglas Murray expressing the same views is that he's an opportunist. That he simply jumped on this gravy train and has been benefiting ever since.
I want to take a minute to say this is not just going to be the usual promotion that I like to do for whatever the guest is doing. I would actually like to take a moment to get briefly into, if not the history of it, then a background to Chronicles magazine as to what makes it different. I remember I first started reading it because Murray Rothbard recommended it in the early 1990s. He thought it was a magazine that was very challenging and interesting, challenging to him in that it made him think. It wasn't just dumb guy arguments that were against his. It was smart arguments that were sometimes against his, and also arguments that were in support of him. And so that was why I started reading it. And this is back before there was like a full-blown internet. And I still to this day, I like to hold a physical magazine. So what exactly has it been over the decades that makes Chronicles magazine not National Review?
What makes it, I think, not National Review is that in some ways it is to the right of National Review. And we would not deny this on social, cultural questions, foreign policy. We're probably closer to the isolationist right of the 1930s than we are to the neoconservatives. But I think there also, in Chronicles, is a willingness to present more than one side of an issue. And I'm so much committed to this position that I'm quite willing to have Marxists write for us. Now, I will not let wokesters write for us. I think they're moral degenerates. But, people are Marxist. I have no objection to having those people write for us. And I think there are serious arguments that could be engaged with the traditional left, not the nutty woke lunatic left that we're dealing with now. And we're open to those discussions. We're open to discussions with what I call conservatism Inc. or the conservative establishment. If they want to talk to us, fine. They do not want to talk to us. We'll talk to them. They don't want to talk to us. I think it is this openness to debate that very clearly distinguishes us from the I don't know what you call it, the French have an expression, la culture unique, the one culture, unique culture that the conservative movement represents. We do not represent that. And, people will sometimes complain. Somebody complained once that I was too soft on West Coast Straussians, with whom I do not agree, by the way, but I am willing to present a position. And we can have a debate. And I had a debate with Michael Anton that lasted about 2 years, in which I basically, defended the traditional right position on natural rights, the Civil War, and so forth. And he presented was essentially what began as Harry Japp's position, but it quickly became Michael Anton's position. But I'm very much open to debates of that kind, and I think everybody else who works for our magazine is. And that, I think, clearly distinguishes us from National Review, which I think by now is almost indistinguishable from the opinions of its neoconservative benefactors.
Yeah. I mean, like anything, every now and again you see a pretty good article on something, but the general gist, I remember I used to subscribe to it when I was in high school in the late 80s and then early into college. And I didn't really know, I was just a dumb kid. Like, I didn't know the difference. I didn't know the different wings. I didn't know any of that. I just knew I wasn't a left liberal. And this was in the old days when Joe Sobran used to write for National Review. So it was clever. Like, Bill Buckley was still there. And Buckley had his problems, but he wasn't a dummy. And he was sometimes entertaining to read. So
Right.
where now I can't imagine, I don't want to read Rich Lowry. Forget it.
It's an act of religious penance or something like that.
Right. And I mean, look, I do want to do penance for my sins, but at the same time, the church is not sadistic, when it lays out the penances. So, Paul, the website for everybody is chroniclesmagazine.org. So I do urge people to check that out. There have to be people. There just have to be people like me. Now, I know you have an online version. I get that. But I want to push the idea of a physical thing. I mean, in this age where AI is writing to you half the time in some of the emails you're getting, and AI making the graphics you're looking at on your screen, and everything's digital, and it's Kindle, and it's this, that, and the other thing. Once in a while, a human being needs to hold printed matter in his hands. And,
Yes.
And I know at the beginning, I tried to say that I'm not just crotchety for its own sake. But, Paul, sometimes I think I am.
Well, that's okay. You'll crotchety in the right way.
Right. So
Or the right causes.
check out chroniclesmagazine.org, and you'll get Paul Gottfried and his friends on a variety of topics of great interest. And you'll see different perspectives in there, too, because how about that? Because it's not a cult, this magazine. It's a very, very interesting thing.
I'm quite willing to publish people who are pro-Churchill. I have no problems with that.
How about that? There you see how compendiously broad the possibilities are.
Mhm.
So, Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.